Talking points. Angela Merkel is set to serve a fourth term as Chancellor of Germany, but during Sunday's election, she suffered defeats in the country's national parliament.
Puerto Rico and Mexico continue recovery efforts from two major storms they suffered last week.
And Talking Points contributor Byron Tollefson spoke with a former Republican congressman who's pushing a climate change action plan around the country.
There are conservatives out here who really believe it's time to act on climate change.
Across the Atlantic, Spain is dealing with a surging independence movement from the Catalonian region. A referendum is set for next week.
And at home, U.S. Education Secretary Betsy DeVos rescinds protections for suspected victims of sexual assault.
All that and more ahead. This is Talking Points. Just a day after Germany saw its first far-right party enter its national parliament since 1961, the chairwoman for that same party says she is walking out. I'm Josh Carney.
And I'm Mike Riccardi. Chairwoman Frauke Petry of the Alternative for Germany party says she will not represent the party in the Bundestag. She says dissent in the AfD prompted her to distance herself from the party. She maintains that the AfD must break with the far right to govern properly. Many describe it as a party inspired by right-wing populism, one that focuses on issues of mass immigration and opposes the EU. And it comes just a day after the AfD's historic gains in the German elections on Sunday. They won 13% of the vote, coming in third place behind Angela Merkel's center-right party and the center-left party.
Meanwhile, Angela Merkel prepares for her fourth term in office, but says that she wants to win back voters who supported the AfD. Some suspect voters abandoned Merkel for her immigration policies, particularly when she welcomes more than 1 million refugees into the country during the migrant crisis of 2015. Now, Merkel and her center-right party will look to form a coalition following the worst conservative election result since she first entered office in 1991.
Now, I don't think that anybody's surprised that Angela Merkel won, and this actually seems like the first election in a while where we haven't been surprised by the results.
Right. I think the biggest component is the fact that it's becoming a more competitive race, and the fact that she is not necessarily losing her base, but losing support in significant quantities is something for her to worry about, and it certainly points to that fact that it may not be such a given in the future.
And we have Talking Points contributor Gabrielle Caracciolo in studio to talk about the significance of Sunday's election results moving forward. Gabrielle, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So Angela Merkel won, right? And in the United States, you know, once somebody loses, we don't really care about them anymore going ahead. For example, Hillary Clinton, you know, a lot of people wishing she would kind of just go away right now. But why does it matter how the other parties did, even though they didn't win?
So the way German elections work is a little bit different. Each voter has 2 votes, one for district representative and the other is just for a party. So now when these party votes are tallied up, the different percentages break down the percentage that party has in German parliament, the Bundestag. So it's significant what other parties get, because even if you come in second or third, fourth or fifth, you are winning seats in German parliament.
Now, even though it's significant for parties whether they win, whether they lose, and if it's 3 or 4 or 5th candidates in the race, it's definitely significant if the front runner is losing what they formerly had in terms of support. So even though Angela Merkel got less votes than she did last time, how is that going to impact her moving forward?
Yeah, so Merkel's party, the Christian Democratic Union, is down about 65 seats, and in the past, the Christian Democratic Union and the Social Democrats had a coalition in Parliament, but the Social Democrats are also down about 40 seats, and their leader, Martin Schulz, has come out today saying that he won't be forming a coalition with Merkel. Merkel is asking him to reconsider, but right now she has to look to other options. So that includes trying to form a coalition with the 4th, 5th, and 6th parties in the parliament, the Left Party, the Green Party, and the Free Democratic Party. So that's going to be an uphill battle because you're trying to get 3 different parties with some opposing views to come together and form a coalition with her own.
And we've seen far-right movements on the rise in the last year or so in the United States, in Britain, in France, and in their elections. What does the rise of the AfD mean for Germany?
Yeah, so the AfD rise is very similar to what we saw with Brexit and the election of President Trump. The Alternative for Germany party their main issues are anti-immigration and anti-establishment. Those were 2 of President Trump's main talking points as he ran for the presidency. So right now, we're not sure exactly how this is going to impact. They only have 94 seats, but we're definitely seeing a rise. They had 0 seats prior to this election, so they are going to have some influence.
Well, with the tailing elections coming up in Europe next, it'll be definitely interesting to see if this far-right movement continues to rise.
Yeah.
Gabrielle, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
After the break, we'll discuss the destructive storms in Puerto Rico and Mexico, where the cleanup continues.
They told me a bottle couldn't dream. That I would never become a superhero. But I learned how to fly. Just to come back in a new disguise. And be the hero that I've always wanted to be.
You've messed up your son's haircut.
Mom?
Do you A, try to fix it,
Like it never happened.
B, work with what you got, or C, show solidarity?
Thank you, baby.
As a parent, there are no perfect answers. But you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
Taking care of a family member can lead to plenty of questions. Fortunately, there's a place to get the answers, for them and for you. Find articles, tips, and tools from experts and others who have been in your place. The Caregiving Resource Center at aarp.org/caregiving.
Puerto Rico and Mexico are both recovering from devastating natural disasters. Mexico is recovering after being hit by an earthquake that registered 7.1 on the Richter scale. And Puerto Rico is seeing the consequences of a Category 4 hurricane. Talking Points contributors Sabrina Majoro and Jack Watson are here to discuss these recovery efforts. Thank you both for being here.
Thanks for having us.
And we're going to get right into this with the extent of the damage. How is this impacting both countries, Sabrina?
Yeah, so for Puerto Rico, the island has been completely devastated by the storm. First off, there's a lack of communication on the island. Communication towers, only 15% of them are currently working. Also, the island is completely without power right now. Compounding this is the fact that water services on the island, only 25% of them are working, and there's been a significant amount of property damage on the island. The houses in Puerto Rico are made of wooden frames with tin roofs. So they were not well prepared for a storm like Maria to come and completely devastate the island.
Absolutely.
And you know, for Mexico, this Saturday actually saw the 3rd earthquake this month, the 3rd significant earthquake this month to impact the Mexican mainland. It registered over 6 on the Richter scale, 6.1 this Saturday. And as a result of these earthquakes, over 300 people are presumed dead and 4,700 presumed injured. And according to CNN, 2,000 schools, because schools are an important focal point here in Mexico City, have been damaged, with 212 reporting significant damage in Mexico City. And as of today, the Chicago Tribune reporting that only 1% of these schools have reopened today.
And now we saw Mexico sending relief to Houston for Hurricane Harvey relief. And we just saw Governor Cuomo going down to Puerto Rico to sort of help with their relief efforts. How is the U.S. government sort of, you know, helping Mexico and Puerto Rico? And is it reciprocal of what Mexico has done for the United States? Jack, and then Sabrina, you could follow up on that as well.
Well, Mike, after Tuesday, President Trump offered his condolences and offered search and rescue teams to rescue survivors out of the rubble. Now, the U.S. government is currently dealing on the U.S. mainland with the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey, of course, in southeastern Texas and Louisiana, as well as in western Florida, Hurricane Irma. So their attention in terms of natural disasters is drawn to a lot more places. And we're talking about Puerto Rico. Every person on that island, every citizen on that island is also a United States citizen.
Yeah.
So the chief concern there is with the United States population.
Yeah, so as a U.S. territory, Puerto Rico is essentially entitled to all the privileges that U.S. citizens are entitled to in terms of minus like voting rights and other restrictions like that. But President Trump declared Puerto Rico a disaster zone, and what that essentially does is open the doors for FEMA and other recovery operations to sort of go into the country and start distributing supplies throughout the island. Right now they're in dire need of backup generators because of the issue with the power, so they need generators and also fuels to supply the generators, and in addition they really need water and other supplies on the island. 10,000 government officials are on the ground for FEMA right now.
Now, going beyond those infrastructural improvements, Jack said that, you know, a tremendous amount of schools are directly impacted by this, and obviously both these countries are struggling a tremendous deal. So what are some of the long-term impacts that we're going to see? Because these storms and their damage cannot be fixed overnight.
Well, for Puerto Rico, the country was experiencing an economic recession. It was a 10-year recession for years prior to this. They actually declared bankruptcy back in May. And so now, with all the catastrophe that we're seeing from Maria, we're going to see a sort of exacerbation of all the economic issues that they were seeing previously. So there's going to be a continuation of a brain drain on the island, which means that educated citizens are going to head to the mainland and look for work there. And then also we're going to see investment shrinking on the island and tourism crippling as well.
So some of those crippling degrees, Jack, how is that going to impact not only this island, but Mexico suffering from some of the similar problems moving forward?
Right. In terms of Mexico, a lot of the problems are immediate. They're not nearly as long-term or as structured in the 6-month to a year region, nearly as much as Puerto Rico's problems are. But it's pretty interesting when you consider the politics of it in Mexico, because President Enrique Peña Nieto is up for re-election in July of 2018. And he's been moving all across the Mexican regions that have been impacted by the earthquakes, and he's been comforting the people there. So the political implications here are pretty significant, because this has resulted in a significant resurgence of Mexican nationalism and pride, as times of crisis tend to do, with a hashtag going around Twitter, hashtag Fuerza Mexico, which roughly translates to strengthen Mexico.
Is that element of nationalism transpiring not only in Mexico but in Puerto Rico as well?
Well, it's difficult to say with Puerto Rico, because, as we said, the communication in Puerto Rico is almost completely devastated. With, I believe, in very small percentages.
There's actually been a lot of panic on the island just because people don't know if their family members in other parts of the island okay. There were reports of people trying to drive to find family members, but they aren't able to do that because infrastructure is a huge problem on the island, and there's been severe flooding as well. So, yeah, it's really hard to tell for sure.
Absolutely. Thank both of you for being here and sharing your insight. I appreciate it.
Well, last week here on the SU campus, there were congressmen from across the country here to discuss the impacts of climate change and how Republican congressmen can take the forefront on that issue. CitrusTV reporter Byron Tollefson has more.
Conservatives fighting against climate change? According to some Democrats, don't hold your breath.
In my opinion, this federal government is the most ignorant federal government we've ever had when it comes to the environment and climate change.
He believes this whole thing that we're talking about is all a hoax, and it's a hoax invented in China. He believes that.
But beyond the White House, there's now a new conservative movement trying to change that, and it came to Syracuse Law School last Thursday. It's called the Republic-Ens, and they're led by former Congressman Bob Inglis.
There are conservatives out here who really believe it's time to act on climate change.
Inglis says he lost re-election for Congress back in 2010 because he supported fighting climate change. His plan includes environmental tax reform as well as free enterprise and limited government. Inglis said part of the reason he chose Syracuse as one of the first stops on his tour was because the region needs economic stimulation. His way of doing that is fighting climate change.
There's a chance of the elected Republicans stepping forward.
And for good reason. 7 Republicans from New York sit on a House Climate Solutions panel, and one of them is Congresswoman Claudia Tenney. Former New York Congressman Richard Hanna says the issue is just about common sense.
It's not fair to deny a problem and ignore it and pretend it doesn't exist. What is fair is to sit down and talk about it openly and honestly, look at the science.
When we get back, U.S. Education Secretary Betsy DeVos is rescinding Obama-era policies that protected suspected victims of sexual assault on college campuses.
They said I have troll teeth.
That my voice sounded like a possessed baby doll.
That no one would ever love someone as stupid as me.
That I was fat, ugly.
Disgusting.
The effect of bullying is potent. We will no longer be the silent majority.
Now, when you see online bullying, there's something you can do about it.
We're gonna take action with the I.
I am a witness.
I am a witness.
I am a witness.
I am a witness.
I am a witness, and so are you.
Your daughter just had her first breakup. Do you A, put yourself in her shoes? B, console her?
Don't worry, sweetie. This is gonna happen a lot.
Or C, find her a new boyfriend?
Nice, single boys. That was weird.
As a parent, there are no perfect answers. But you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
The Catalonian push for sovereignty continues, and it could split Spain from its richest region. Talking Points contributor Elijah Shama is here to break down the implications.
Thanks, Josh. Europe has been awash in independence movements of late. First there was Brexit, then the murmurings of a potential Frexit. Now, Spain is dealing with its own independence movement, and this one is steeped in history. The Catalonian region of Spain is set to vote in an independence referendum on October 1st. This vote on whether or not to remain a part of Spain has been declared both unconstitutional and illegal by the Spanish government, and it's already led to the arrest of 14 Catalonian officials. The Spanish government says mayors in the region have been subject to, quote, Nazi-like intimidation by independence forces. No matter what happens, though, independence leaders say the vote will go on regardless. The Catalonian region of Spain rests on the country's Mediterranean coast and contains roughly 7.5 million people, with the majority of whom residing in the city of Barcelona. Catalonians argue that they have a moral, cultural, economic, and political right to self-determination, and they feel that they've often put more into Spain than they've received. The numbers back them up on this. The Catalan region of Spain amounts to 25.5% of the country's exports and has the largest GDP of any Spanish region. Culturally, the region is also unique from Spain, with its own language of Catalan and a mixture of Spanish and French culture. In the past, following the Spanish Civil War, General Francisco Franco suppressed the Catalonian culture, and many in the region see the Spanish government's attempt to discredit the vote and the sending of additional police forces to the region as an extension of that suppression. And going back to the future, Spain is bracing for what could be a historical vote on the country's future. Thank you.
On Friday morning, Education Secretary Betsy DeVos announced she is ending Obama-era policies for handling sexual assault on college campuses. She says the guidelines were too aggressive in investigating sex crimes. Talking Points contributor Morgan Trow is here to talk about the political implications and changes being made to Title IX. Morgan, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Now, according to Betsy DeVos, these guidelines are just too harsh. What's her reasoning?
She believes that they're unfairly denying due process rights to those who are accused of sexual assault and claims it sets a lower standard of proof and will allow universities to modify the evidence. She changed it from a preponderance of evidence to a clear and concise evidence.
Now, what does this mean for students, especially the victims, but also the accusers, for what this policy will mean on their college campus?
Well, many colleges have already spent so much time and money on this. Right now, it's only in interim guidelines, so colleges don't actually have to follow it, but once the Department of Education pushes that, the results will be much clearer.
Now, do you think that these new guidelines will have an effect on victims of sexual assault? Do you think this will prevent them from speaking out and coming forward about what has happened?
I do believe that it will. In the Obama administration guidelines, there were protections for victims of sexual assault and violence. However, these take them away, and I feel that victims and survivors could think that they don't have a voice anymore.
All right, Morgan, thanks so much for being here. We'll definitely keep an eye on it, and if there's any new developments, we'll be sure to talk about it.
Thank you
so much. Coming up, we'll cover the stories you missed in the past week. Stay with us.
Well, Thomas, you've got pre-diabetes. But with more exercise and a change in diet, it can be reversed.
I've tried exercising. It just makes me hungry for bacon.
I love bacon, too. And who really likes to exercise?
Not me.
Me neither.
Nobody. So we're good?
What? Oh, you still have pre-diabetes. Big time.
So, same time next week?
Well, of course.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. This is a serious problem, but one we can solve. Visit feedingamerica.org to help. Together we can solve hunger. Together we're feeding America.
Some stories inevitably do not capture the mainstream attention they deserve. This week on Talking Points, we bring you 2 elections from abroad you may not have heard about.
Iraqi Kurds cast their votes in a controversial independence referendum today. The semi-autonomous region of Kurdistan in northern Iraq says the referendum will give the government a mandate to achieve independence. Voting began early this morning and ended at noon. Nearly 2,000 polling stations were in use across the region. Preliminary results will be released in 3 days.
Iraq has been hostile towards the independence movement, and the Iraqi parliament authorized Prime Minister Haidar al-Abadi to use necessary force to maintain a unified Iraq. Iraq and Turkey also opposed the referendum. Both countries have large Kurdish minorities and fear an uprising should the referendum succeed. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan threatened to cut off oil exports from northern Iraq. The United States, United Kingdom, and the United Nations all fear that Kurdish independence could draw attention and resources away from the continuing fight against ISIS. However, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu endorsed the vote, calling it a legitimate effort to achieve their own state.
While South Korea and the United States offered diplomatic responses to North Korea's aggression, Japan has taken another route. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe called for early elections today to gain himself a stronger mandate. The Prime Minister will aim to take advantage of a recent uptick in popularity following his response to recent nuclear tests. The snap elections will take place a year ahead of normal schedule. Abe plans to abolish the lower house of the Japanese parliament in order to seek the mandate of the people immediately.
Abe's tenure as Prime Minister has been plagued by corruption scandals in the cabinet. However, his diplomatic handling of the recent tensions between Japan and North Korea caused a surge in opinion polls in Japan. Abe also plans to utilize his newfound popularity in support of his long-term goals after 2 North Korean missiles were fired over northern Japan. Abe said he wishes to restructure Japan's defensive strategy. The Prime Minister wishes to remove caps on Japan's military strength that were placed after World War II. Abe's campaign is also based on his economic achievements since taking office. When we come back, we'll tell you the stories we're looking ahead to in the week ahead.
This is the story of a boy who didn't talk for a long time. The boy liked things to always be the same. Any changes would scare and upset him. The unknown was an unfriendly place. The boy was very sensitive to lights and sounds. So he built secret hiding places where they couldn't get in. The boy didn't like looking people in the eye. He wasn't trying to be mean, it just made him feel uncomfortable. Sometimes he would flap his arms again and again.
One day, I found out I have something called autism. My family got me help. Slowly, I found my voice and learned all the ways I could live with it better.
Early intervention can make a lifetime of difference. Learn the signs at autismspeaks.org.
Here we go. We're gonna go out there in the rain. You're gonna get wet. All right, here we go. Okay, quick. Oh yeah, yes. So much fun. Mwah. So wet.
It is a big week for a major component of the Trump agenda, tax reform. The battle over a $1.5 trillion tax cut is looming as Republican leaders and the Trump administration are set to unveil their strategy by the end of the week. The House Ways and Means Committee is now in the final day of their policy retreat meant to figure out a path forward for the tax plan proposal. The Trump administration claims their proposal will lead to a growth rate of 3% and maintains that tax cuts will pay for themselves. On Wednesday, the Big Six, a working group made up of House Republicans and Trump administration officials, are expected to release a framework of policy principles so the legislative process can begin. I'll be looking ahead to how one of the administration's major selling points will finally take shape and how the foreseeable battle begins.
On Saturday, Iran tested their newest ballistic missile, capable of carrying multiple warheads and flying over 2,000 kilometers, far enough to hit U.S. ally Israel. Fast forward to October 15th, and President Trump will have to decide whether or not Iran has thus far complied with the terms of the Iran nuclear deal. Although the president has already confirmed Iran's compliance twice in the past, this time around may be different. Last week, during his speech to the UN General Assembly, President Trump called the deal one of the worst and most one-sided transactions the United States has ever entered into. Saturday's missile test provoked this response from the president on Twitter, further signaling the possibility that Trump may try to withdraw from the deal. Now, President Trump has already made up his mind, but not many on the outside know what he's thinking. In turn, Iran has warned that they could walk away from the deal if President Trump were to decertify their compliance. In the coming weeks, I will be watching for any developments that may solidify or change the president's decision. And as we near that October 15th deadline, here at Talking Points, we will continue to monitor the latest and bring you the final result. Now, moving ahead, looking at Iran, President Trump, he has said that he is willing to back out, and now it's kind of like, will he or won't he? Iran said they too could back out. So moving forward, nobody really knows what he's thinking. Now, Rex Tillerson has said that President Trump has made up his mind, but he hasn't told anybody what he's thinking. None of us know what's going to happen.
Right now, I think it's a game of rhetoric, and that's all we can hope for at this point. Well, that's all we have for tonight. Thanks for joining us.
Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for clips and full-length episodes.
For all those here at Talking Points, I'm Josh Carney.
And I'm Mike Riccardi. Good night.